Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. I'm making this video right after my Are You in the Collecting Closet video, so the lighting is still the same. I try to get as many of these videos out as I can when Little Reaper is off doing something else, because then he'd be banging on the door, sticking his hands underneath the door, like almost like a horror movie and all that. So I figured it'd be a good time to make a couple of videos. For this video, it's another episode, another volume, whatever I decide to call it, in my favorite comic series. And in this series, I try to show two comics that I consider my favorite, and I tell you why. And it gives me a good chance to, although I've covered these subjects in multiple videos spread out through the many years I've been on YouTube, this series is almost serving as an origin series, a sort of origin series to me collecting. So I enjoy talking about those things. Other than showing off new books and all that, I enjoy actually talking about the book and the meaning behind them. So I'm going to start off with this one right here. The Amazing Spider-Man 300. We all know this is the first full appearance of Venom. So why is this one of my favorites? Is Venom one of my favorite characters? Well, I like Venom. I wouldn't say he's in my top 5 favorite characters. He might be in my top 10. I don't know. I haven't come up with my top 10. But just thinking about it right now when it comes to top 5, no, I'd probably say he's not in my top 5. So why is this book? What's the big deal with this book? Is this a high dollar book? I mean, it can be depending on what grade. My copy's probably like an 8.0. Well, one day I'd like to upgrade it. I'm probably not going to sell this one. And the reason why is because of the story behind it. I have pretty much an attachment to this book. And I have attachment to the next book I'm going to show. That attachment is, when I first started collecting, this happened, I got this book at the end of the first year of me becoming a true comic book collector, buying new books, trying to get old books. So this was at the end of 1993. It was right after, a couple days after Christmas. So that was back when I enjoyed looking through long boxes at small cons, at hotels, and community centers and all that. I never went to a big con back in those days. I couldn't wait to get the Wizard magazine and look in the back and look up my state and see where some of the local cons were going to be, if they were near my town or if they were actually in my town, which several were. It was always a great time then to go there with maybe 20, 30 bucks or 50 bucks if I was able to save up that much and come home with something nice. So with not having a whole lot of money back then, because I was still pretty much a kid, I was only able to go there with a very limited amount of money. So coming home with something like this was, really difficult. Now, back in those days, I think at least a 9.0 copy was going for about 70 to 75 bucks. So this was a couple days after Christmas. I think it was the 28th, and I'll never forget it. And this is why I have such an attachment to this book. This is why this is one of my favorite books of all time in my collection, my favorite books in my collection, a book that I'm not going to be selling. Because I have a certain attachment to it. I got this particular book that night, and this was my first real big book that was in pretty good shape. Okay, a lot of my books, since, like I was saying, I don't have that much money getting the older books, a lot of them weren't in very nice shape. This was my first real big book that I was able to get in pretty decent shape. Like I said, it's an 8.0, so it's not bad. And it was great back then among all my other books. And it was the first full appearance of Venom. Very popular character. Like I said, I liked Venom. I loved Spider-Man. This is around the time when I was really getting into Spider-Man, so to have a major first appearance of a major villain was great. Venom, of course, was right up there as one of the major modern villains that Spider-Man, tangled with. And I got this book that night. My father actually got it for me. He paid $45 for this. And I'll never forget that night going home. It was like late at night. The Comic-Con was, the comic show was actually at night. I think it was like from 5 to 9 or something like that. A really bizarre time, okay? It was a Thursday night from what I remember. So yeah, I just have such a wonderful memory of the end of December. Every end of December, I think of this book. That night going home, you know, cold New Jersey weather, coming from a local Comic-Con, and coming home, my first real big book. It was truly great. And on top of that, I really enjoyed the story. I read it inside out, this book. It was really good. So that's why Amazing Spider-Man 300 is one of my favorite comics. Let's get to the last book of this video. Now, very similar. You know, I talked about, you know, that was my first big book that I was able to, well, at least my dad was, I was able to, you know, have a nice copy of a really cool character in Venom. Well, this one right here, I've told this story many times. And now it's in its new CGC slab after so many years of being in my collection. The first appearance of the Punisher, Amazing Spider-Man 129. I purchased this a couple of months after this. But instead I used my own money that I took out of my bank account. I said to myself that day, this was February, like where this was a cold winter night. This was a cold, snowy day when I got this. This was on a Saturday. I think it was February 15th. No. February 16th or 18th. One of those days. I got to look it up again. I know I have the Wizard magazine where it says the show that I purchased this at. So I purchased this at the Woodbridge Sheraton. And I remember the night before we had a really bad snowstorm. And this was back when it seemed like snow would come up to your knees. It was that bad. It probably wasn't that high, and you know, but that's the way I remember it. But that show was still on. And because of the snowstorm, I showed up early anyway. And because of the snowstorm, there wasn't anyone in the at the convention yet. It was just maybe one or two other people walking around. But that convention, I had money taken out of my account, $150, and I said I wanted to get a nice book. You know, after getting this one, getting a taste of, you know, what having a really nice looking copy in your collection, what it feels like. I said, oh, I would like to have something else, but I want something bigger. Now, at the time, I think a 9.0 was going for like maybe $250. So I went in there with $150 and I had 4 books in mind that I wanted to get. Obviously this one, Incredible Hulk 181, Iron Fist 14, and I guess a low-grade copy of Amazing Spider-Man 14. So I went walking around. I'm sure they had all 4 books. I mean, I know they had this one, right? But I'm sure they had the other 3. But I guess as I was walking around, I said to myself, well, what could $150 really get me? Could it get me a really nice copy of Amazing Spider-Man 14? No. So I guess I passed on that one. Could it get me a nice copy of Iron Fist 14? Absolutely. $150 could probably get me like a 9.6 back then. Could it get me a nice copy of this and Incredible Hulk 181? Sure could. But for whatever reason, I went for this one. And the guy was selling it for $150 on the dot, right to the dollar. And this was back before I even knew about the date stamp. I mean, fortunately, it had the date stamp in it. But I just took a look at the book and I said, sure, I'll take it. And I gave him the $150 and I walked out with my big book. And that was it. And that's one of my fondest memories of purchasing a comic. It was a little crazy because, you know, like I said, it had, you know, I wasn't checking for restoration back then. I didn't check for the Marvel stamp. I don't know if did I call it a Marvel stamp or date stamp before? I don't remember. Marvel stamp. I was so uneducated on collecting comics. It was a bit of a risk. But it turned out, because after many years of having this in my collection, and I did have it pressed, to be fair. I think it was probably maybe in the 8.5 range when I had it pressed. Maybe it could have been 9. I don't know. But it turned out pretty well. Came out to be a 9.2. And I know some people, they say when it comes to slabbing books, oh, you should free the comic from the slab prison. The way I see it, this thing has been free since 1974. It's about time it gets a rest and stays the grade it is. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope that some of these stories really resonate with some people. Maybe some of you have similar stories. I'm pretty sure that you do. And you can feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching, everyone. Take care.